right, welcome back to the broadcast, and it's that time where we discuss the pertinent issues, key issues in the society. We've been doing so much of politics, but also current affairs are key. And today is the 26th of Friday, June. You probably do not know this, but I will remind you, it is the International Day in support of victims of torture. So we take a look at all this, knowing very well that recently we've been talking about the issues of police brutality across the world that have been meted upon different people, especially as we try to instill measures that have been put on board to deal with COVID-19. That one, of course, is something that is considered as torture, and we've seen very many cases cropping up. And right here in the country, we have notable cases. We've seen people losing their lives. We have victims right here complaining of police brutality. The police too also feel like we've been very, brutal against them. So this is something that we need to converse around, on equal measures as we take a look at torture and what exactly torture is all about. So joining me this morning is Steve Isinta. He's an advocate of the High Court and also of IMLU Networks. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
All right, and it's a special edition just for you, so we can learn everything, everything and all that there is to learn about, torture and all that. It's pretty much important that a day has been set to commemorate this. That's a clear indication that there's need for us to come out as a society to ensure that we make torture a game of the past. So, as basic as I would want to ask, what is torture?
Thank you, Linda. Torture, by its very definition, under the United Nations Convention Against Torture, Cruel, and other degrading treatment, is defined as that act, whether physical or mental, or psychological act of oppressing someone in order to either coerce them to give some information, stop them from doing something, extract confessions. So it's an act which places, it sort of lords over the victim in order to obtain something from them. So that's just a rough definition, and that the same definition is adopted by Section 4 of our Prevention of Torture Act of 2017.
And speaking of torture, one would want to know, does it go to that level where it's physical, or there are very many forms of torture?
Yes, well, like I told you, it's physical and also mental.
Mental, yes.
So, of course, it's again broken down. Now, for physical, of course, you have things like the basic beatings. You have the basic, somebody's being told, kneel down for a while, especially by public officers, including police officers. The psychological could be things like being kept away from your family for so long. Maybe if you are arrested by the police and then you're not taken through due process. You find maybe there are instances where the police can take someone and go around with him or her all over the town for like 6-7 hours. That is very psychological. It's psychologically traumatizing. So there are various ways, but mainly it is physical as well as mental.
Well, one would ask, why is it that Linda is asking such a basic question? Not as basic, because there are very many people who would have been going through torture without their knowledge that indeed this is torture, especially at that level of the family setup and everything. So does this culminate or extend to the level of family before we now delve into the actual aspect of it?
Well, yes, I do understand that that's a question that has come out so many times. However, for the purposes of the torture we're speaking about under the United Convention, it's mainly to deal with public officers, because the need for that convention came up because there was a huge concern that citizens around the world were suffering due to oppression from government officers, especially the security forces. I don't want to be specific about police, because the other forces which have coercive nature in terms of force. For example, we have Kenya wildlife officers. You've had instances where you hear people were found in a national game reserve, and then on suspicion of poaching, then you hear they were taken through so much torture, physical beatings, and maybe at the end of the day there was no evidence. It's just because they were found there, they're suspected, and maybe there's been a huge outcry about poaching. So you find such officers, when they encounter these people, instead of arresting them, then maybe they feel, oh, we don't have the evidence now. We've not found them with the trophies, game trophies. So they decide to the judge, jury, and executioner. So they torture these people. By the time these people are handed over to the Kenya Police Service, the National Police Service, you find people have wounds, they have beatings, maybe they've been incarcerated illegally for several days, just in order to extract information or to be shown where these things are, if they exist. So For the law mainly applies for public offices.
Right.
For the basic, let me not say call it basic, for the common torture you're asking about, like at home, or even at the workplace, that one is covered by other statutes, including the Penal Code.
Right.
For example, for sexual harassment, of course, the Sexual Offences Act already covers it. But for the Prevention of Torture Act and the 1987 Convention against torture, it's mainly to deal with public officers, because it's also a tool to control abuse by public officers. Yes.
All right, and speaking of which, at some point I'll force you to go specific, of course, on the cases that we've witnessed right here in the country, but not before you probably just expound this further, because then you've captured, or you've mentioned something to do with illegal torture, for that matter, or illegal approach on this.
All torture is illegal.
Yes, now that is what I wanted to get clear, because at what point then, if of course this person has been captured illegally, I mean there's a problem, they've probably done something that is against the law. I mean, at what level then should we enforce a torture? At what point does it become legal torture? I would wanted to ask that.
Well, Linda.
Yes, all it is
all
illegal.
of it is illegal, because torture by its very nature, it's degrading. And when you say something like, and many Kenyans say this, I'm not surprised that somebody has been has done something. Right. You see, legally speaking, that doesn't exist. It is until proven guilty.
Right.
I mean, that is a basic standard for all civilized society. Because at the same time, as we assume that this person is guilty by us saying he's guilty, if we don't take them through a process, what about next time? It is you who's being accused of something that you've not done.
Right.
So because we already have systems, we are no longer in jungle law mode. We're in a mode where we have systems, we have institutions.
Right.
And therefore, because we have placed ourselves in that system, by all of us obey the law, we believe, and we are supposed to obey the law. The same way you expect the government, your taxes to work, and the government to provide you services because you pay taxes. It means under the social foundations of law, sorry to digress a bit, but under social foundations of law, we've passed on our powers to a body politic, that is the government. Therefore, in the same vein, you cannot be obeying or saying that you subscribe to this notion of government, whereby now you obey the government, you pay taxes, you follow the law, you know that I'm not supposed to do this, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then on the other side, you want to now apply your own standards on issues like torture, like saying, oh, this person is a thief, we caught him in the act, let us lynch him, let us beat him up until Atoyo Simu, and all those kind of things.
Right.
It is not allowed. All of this is because we cannot trust individuals to enforce the law as they wish. That is why we have institutions.
Okay.
Yes.
And speaking of the law, now that you are in the justice system, one would argue that again it's been a toll for again victims of torture to at least attain the justice after torture has been meted upon them. Why is this? I mean, what do you suppose informs all this, the drama that surrounds that, and to what point then does justice that become served, or at what point then would someone say that confidently, yes, this is torture that was meted upon me, or vice versa, and then finally justice has been served?
Good, that's a good question. Basically, the issue here is the challenges that come up with torture victims and her access to justice. The first and main impediment to access of justice to these victims is usually documentation. I mean, it is one thing, for example, to be, I'm not picking out on the National Police Service, but it's the common one that we hear every day. Because of their basic main interaction, they mainly interact with the society, with the wananchi. For example, if you encounter a police officer and they brutalize you in some way, maybe they beat you up and all that, you go and then maybe when you speak to someone, a friend, a colleague, whatever, what you'll be told, you'll find it's an attitude problem in Kenya. You find people will easily want to justify it by saying, oh, hata una bahati ukuvunjika mguu, kuna mwingine ungepigwa hata risasi, watu unajua. And that to me is a very sad fact. So what happens is most people do not document. By the time the thing is coming out, either it's not time barred, of course, in criminal law justice system, there's no limitation of time in criminal offenses. However, if it takes too long, maybe the injuries have already healed or started healing, therefore you're unable to get a proper medical report to signify or to demonstrate that actually I suffered these injuries. So documentation is the first thing. But of course, that like I said, is brought up by the attitude issue. We feel. Secondly, it's the way our system has been operating.
Right.
You feel like, oh, this is a police officer, nothing will be done.
Will be done to them.
So
but
that
is it not the
historical.
case? Is it not? It is historical. It is something that has been happening in the country, and reality is that we have seen this happening, and a majority of people have even gone to points of reporting at a very early stage. But again, it is the police, so nothing is normally done.
No, I know.
And if it is done, it's done in a very later case where you are already exhausted in following up on the same.
True. I agree with that. But throughout history, you'll see that society has triumphed over a lot of things. Slavery, apartheid in South Africa. You remember, like in South Africa, apartheid was legal. It was in the laws. No, now you can imagine if the people in South Africa, the Nelson Mandela's, the Steve Biko's, they decided that, oh, this is just nothing will happen.
Okay.
So for us, and that is why we have organizations such as IMLU in collaboration with others, they create a platform for victims of torture. And they also collaborate with people who we refer as human rights defenders who are now based in the various areas of the country. Especially, and I'm sure you know this, that informal settlements have the highest incidences or complaints of torture.
Yes.
Now, torture is a socio-economic issue. You and I, maybe when we're in our cars, or even walking, maybe the way you dress, maybe the way your cameraman dresses, we might be treated differently from other members of society. Somebody sees you and they just feel, this one you can't mess with her.
In fact, there's something that, there's a notion that they say, I don't know whether the safari boots, you know,
yes.
they call it the Sahara. Sometimes you're seen wearing a Sahara, automatically you're judged wrongly.
Yes, and that is sad. And you see there's a particular demographic in Kenya, the youth, who are they bear the greatest brunt of torture. And which is unfortunate because the youth are already suffering from issues of unemployment, you know, disillusionment. You finish school, you don't know what's going to happen. You find you're just seeing statistics that too many graduates, so very few jobs. But anyway, back to the point. The issue is that when the documentation has not been done properly from the onset, it brings problems, even for organizations, which are human rights organizations which try to assist, because at some point they will need a medical report to be prepared. This person needs to see a counselor if the torture had a very huge impact on their psychology. The issues of lawyers, taking of witness statements.
And it's an expensive process for a majority of people. They'll tell you that. So sometimes they tend to give up. I mean, what is being done towards ensuring that these processes are not as expensive so that they do not get people shying away from proceeding to get them?
Thankfully, the law has cured that in a way, because under the law, apart from just reporting to the police, you also have the option of reporting to the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights. And of course, you don't need to pay anything because that's a constitutional body. It's established by the Human Rights Act. And that issue, that aspect of giving options. And the third option is you can report to any other body. And this other body would include a body like IPOA. And IPOA has been at the forefront of trying to hold police, rogue policemen. I mean, we're not here to say all police are rogue. There are rogue elements in the system like every other system. I mean, whether even as lawyers, even journalists, there are rogue elements. So there are options under the law. But the problem is, like many other aspects of society, not just Kenya, like many other issues in society, it's also ignorance. But more than ignorance is normalizing of a culture. You understand? You know that in some cultures, in some communities in Kenya, despite it being illegal, FGM is still being practiced. Yes, so I mean, is it an issue that these people don't care? Or no, most of it needs to do with education, sensitization, and those kind of things that will enable people to know that we don't need to normalize. You know, torture is very degrading and it's very stressful.
Which would have informed my next question, like how much, how many people are privy to the information that there are other bodies and organizations that can come in handy towards addressing these issues? I mean, how much sensitization has been done? How much civic education has been given to these people? We can talk about FGM and we say that, you know, this one, so much has been done globally and information is out here. They have gone all the way to the rural areas to ensure that this is disseminated to the people. But how much of information do the people have towards ensuring that, you know what, if torture is meted upon me, I know the right places to go to, and I know that I'm going to get help?
Yes. First of all, I would need to tell you, in comparison with, for example, FGM, promotion, like not promotion, sorry, FGM activism around stopping it, you find that compared to torture is not attractive. I'll have to say this. I mean, for many NGOs even, it's not attractive as a, for example, you know, when you bring in women rights, children rights, it's a truth that many people don't want to discuss. That, people will say, for example, how many times have you heard about activities around torture? Very few. Very few times. Very few. And maybe before today's show, it was very few. I mean, maybe
that's why I started by saying, I know you might not know this, but today is International Day for Victims.
So it just shows the malaise in our minds. Like we seem to categorize rights, which is very unfortunate, because all these rights are human rights, and human rights are inherent.
Is it because there's so much of a gray area on what exactly torture is? And I know we've said that all torture is illegal, but sometimes, you know, someone will say, we did this in self-defense, we did this because this person was a little bit, I mean, there's some bit of gray area. The
truth is, and I would even speak for fear of
being quoted,
being regarded as not being very good with even the organization that sponsored me for this show. I would say that, like I repeat, that by its nature, torture compared to FGM, even land rights do not get as much prominence. It is all about people are trying to get donor funding. So it's about the bottom line for some of these NGOs. Like, which program are we going to come up with? Because torture, even by itself, is unanticipated, ill. So therefore, it's very hard to attract. But you see, when you tell people FGM is prevalent in X community, it's very easy to get funding. So I think it's, but at the same time, I also take, I have to shift blame to government agencies, including constitutional bodies, because they have the mandate, they have the funding. NGOs cannot do this by themselves. For example, the Kenyan, I always believe that the Kenyan National Commission for Human Rights can come out strongly to support the efforts by the NGOs. It doesn't need to look like government versus NGOs over something that should be a common goal for everyone.
And now that we spoke about IMLU, and that is the Independent Medical Legal Unit, as of 2016, I'll go back and I'll expect you to tell us what progress we've made so far. As around 2016, and they had taken an overview of 5 years that indicated that 30.3% of Kenyans are victims of torture or ill treatment. I mean, what efforts have we done so far towards ensuring that this is a game of the past, much as we're still talking about it? And what if you know, what could be the numbers standing at right now?
Okay, I'll start with the last question, which is the numbers are not very clear right now, because there's a report being compiled as we speak, in terms of now for the past 3 years, where were we, where are we now, where do we intend to go to? Now, on your first question, is the efforts that have been put include, like I told you, capacity building for human rights defenders. Capacity building, and that would include also lawyers. I mean, the lawyers who are actively on the ground. There's also issues of training of the same human rights defenders in terms of the specific ways of documentation of torture cases, because not all complaints may be worth taking to court, for example, because someone may say that I was stopped by a policeman. He asked for my driving license. He kept me there for 1 hour. Well, yes, the person, you have different levels of tolerance. So to someone else, they may be like, this guy ruined my day, and therefore, but then you see again, you may ask yourself, well, you're not the only person on that road. Therefore, I mean, this officer was probably dealing with other people. We don't know, maybe you are not very cooperative. Anyway, the efforts, and then that's the first step, capacity building of human rights defenders, including lawyers and all that. The second has also been the aspect of conducting public interest litigation towards bringing these cases to the fore. There's some cases that have been used as test cases, and there are also cases which are the NGO world has been sponsoring, especially IMLU, in compensation claims for the victims. There has also been improvement, seeking of improvements of legislation that already exists, in terms of, for example, under the Prevention of Torture Act, there's the aspect of a fund that is supposed to be set up to compensate victims. as we speak, that has not yet. It's the cabinet secretary who's supposed to come up with regulations to govern that fund. However, of course, we now, like every other, I think Kenya, we have this, we develop jurisprudence, I would say that. However, we also take a lot of time over very basic issues. For example, the Act speaks of a minister. You find the acts which speak of minister. When you go to court, you'll be told, oh, not yet, there's not yet a minister, it has to be amended to put the cabinet secretary and those kind of things. So yes, on those three fronts, I would say the NGO world is really trying, especially IMLU, yes.
All right, IMLU Executive Director at some point in time said that the rise was pointing out, and suddenly most of the, was actually shooting up, and the incidents were ill treatment, torture, and they were actually happening in the context of enforcement of law, like you had rightfully put it. So we come back to the cases that we've witnessed right here in the country. We know the global fraternity, has been out there talking about the aspect of Black Lives Matter. This was, of course, propagated by what we saw, torture, police torture again. And we come back home. The numbers are high as it stands right now. As of, say, March, I mean, the very first times that we were reporting the cases of COVID-19, you realize that many people had died out of torture, in comparison to how many people had died because of COVID-19, which we were trying to contain. What do you make of this report?
Yeah, those reports are accurate, and sometimes I even feel it doesn't reflect the true picture, because the numbers are actually higher. Because there are those people who are tortured and they just go home. They feel lucky that they were not taken to a police cell, and somehow they may die out of complications. You may hear about it, you may never hear about it. So yes, the numbers are there. What happens is now, it's the coercion aspect of our security forces. I think it goes back to their training. Since time immemorial, we've been giving a lot of excuses on behalf of rogue police officers. The other day, we had the police spokesman speak about that, these policemen, maybe they are young, maybe they are undergoing a lot of pressure. We give a lot of excuses. Yet you and I, when we break the law, nobody is going to give us excuses on our behalf. So the prevalence comes by inaction, by the seniors in government, the people in government. Of course, we've seen the CS of Interior and Security has been very CS Matiang'i has tried. However, this goodwill needs to cascade down. It is more than just giving a press briefing or a presser. It goes beyond that. There need to be deliberate efforts towards reforming the police. Of course, back around 2014, I was part of discussions that were engaged in police working reforms group and all that. And those days it was very good, because it was a collaboration between the non-governmental organizations, civil society as you call it, and the security sector. And it was very good. But along the way, the momentum, once the laws started coming into place, and everybody assumed that things would be well. We forget that every year, the new people being recruited as policemen, have they internalized what you've been trying to do all these years? So that's also the thing. The culture needs to be a point where if a new police officer is joining, they've been trained about basic human rights, basic constitutional law in regard to Chapter 4 of the Constitution, so that some things are a no-brainer. But for now, I think the things of obeying of superior order or stress of work, for example.
And I think I wanted to ask that. As much as we might be very tough, I mean, some of these questions we need to ask, because if a policeman has undergone all these processes and they know very well what is expected of them, they are supposed to be out here protecting and serving the people, and then they do contrary. The other time, the DPP approved, just the other day actually, approved prosecution of police officer who shot the dead 13-year-old during curfew.
And Yasmin Moyo case.
And much more cases that have been talked about. And some of them actually looked at it as though it was unfair. So then you sit down and ask yourself, why? What could inform this move by them looking at this as though it's unfair?
Who's saying it's unfair? The Mwananchi or the police?
There are a couple of the police themselves. There are a couple of
they feel it's unfair for him to be arrested.
And then you'd ask, I mean, could there be some psychological undoing that is playing out in regards to the same, or what could be informing the fact that they still proceed to mate this torture upon victims, upon people, yet they know very well that there are other ways of dealing with this in law?
Well, you see, for me it would be very unfortunate if the police were to come out and speak of their psychological aspect as being
as an excuse.
Why? Simply because why would you give this person a gun in the first place if they're not well psychologically? Yes. Right. This person needs help.
Yes.
But then again, Linda, you must know that from the cases I've observed so far about policemen who have been taken, every case, especially a case of murder, if a policeman is being if someone is being charged for murder, one of the things that the High Court will always do is to ask that this person be taken for mental assessment. So it is an excuse people come up with. On behalf, I've not had any police officer claiming I was mentally unstable. I've not seen a medical report from a psychologist or a psychiatrist indicating that this person was not in control of their faculties when they were going for this operation. Some of it is just bad manners. We have to put it as it is. Some of it is just bad manners, and it is also the feeling throughout the course of time. With the exception of C.S. Matiang'i to an extent, most of the previous ministers and cabinet secretaries in charge of security, they've always been protecting. In fact, some of them, we may rest in peace, Honorable Kaiseri, was always very, very clear that we are going to protect these officers. Some of these CSs made it very clear that they will not support IPOA in conducting of investigations. They even told police, don't listen to these people. So you see, when those kind of obstacles, they get into the mind of individual officers who may have the intention to be rogue or are already rogue, and they feel they are untouchable. But thankfully, at least with the DPP that we have right now, he is trying. He is trying to put people to account. IPOA is also doing a good job. In fact, the last office, the previous office of Machare Njeru, who's now the JSC representative for lawyers, really did a good job.
And speaking of which, I will tell you that they have been frustrated in trying to see to it that people get justice, and we make torture a game of the past. Also, they have cited issues to do with, difficulties coming from the victims themselves. And, sometimes so much fear instilled by the police or the people who are making these torture forms, and so that you'll find victims opting out. And like you said, there are very many untold stories out there. What are we doing towards ensuring that people are able to come out and speak about it? Because you've said this is one of the biggest undoings of it.
I will not speak on behalf of IPOA for obvious reasons. However, I will speak out from experience. It is that it is true. You cannot have 100% reporting. However, a lot, of course, that means a lot needs to be done in terms of sensitization. The only problem is that the people like you and I, let's call ourselves middle class, although that's another story altogether. We don't give a damn. We don't care. We don't care. So the problem is that you have this segment of the society which is down there, which is being told things like, for example, you're being told, oh, you need to come, we take your statement. This person is probably doing a job which is what is sustaining their family. So you find if he misses to go to the factory, his family will not have a meal for the day. So there are also socioeconomic realities. But the way to bridge that gap is even the media, you would support by making sure that these cases are given prominence. We pay less attention to politics. Of course, politics is important and it drives all of us in some way. But at the same time, we give more prominence. So that with time, it's known that this is not something that we will take. I come from a community that was very huge or very serious, or big with things like FGM. But that has been
paved away by over time.
Yes, because you see, bad manners, time can cure it, but mostly it's the people themselves by intentionally provoking debate. Because I mean, it should not be. We should not be waiting for 26th of June to discuss torture. We can do better. We can do better. We can set aside. It doesn't even need to be once a month, even every 3 months, to just discuss, to ask ourselves, where are we? Ask yourself a question, for example. You remember when the COVID, like you mentioned it, when COVID started and all that. You remember what happened at the ferry? Do you think that was torture?
Well, yes, it was.
It was torture. I mean, you saw how people were being told to lie down and all that. And even some of the people who were making them do that, that's not even I saw NYS officers beating up on
This is not supposed to be your job.
You see, that is illegal. That is even illegal. We are so used to normalizing illegality. Officers were beating up, stopping people, telling them get out because it's past curfew hours. You remember the initial days? The police were so surprised when Matiang'i said everybody to bear the consequences. Then the police were saying that it is the government which bought us these whips. So why are we being blamed? So it tells you that we don't have public officers who can independently interpret the law. They just wait. They're like zombies. Some of them are like zombies. But the consoling factor is, I've dealt with officers nowadays. Many officers, even on their own, they go for further training. They do short courses, even not to do with security.
Right.
Somebody find an officer who has gone and done some diploma in IT, and you'll find most of those ones who seek for self-improvement are more likely to be very reasonable. But the typical officer who just gets into the force, waits for orders. And yet, even the National Police Service Act, the police standing orders themselves, they tell them, do not obey an unlawful order. So when somebody tells you, go and beat up people because they have flouted the curfew, that is torture. Somebody is telling you to commit an illegality.
You need to question that and say that, no, this is not how it should work.
And the funny thing, they are protected by law. In fact, the Act itself, the Prevention of Torture Act, it states very clearly, I think under Section 6, that no action shall be taken against the public officer who refuses to obey an order that is unlawful in nature, especially one that leads to torture.
Okay.
So the laws are there. It's not about that they don't know.
They don't know. But sometimes we push them to levels where what are they supposed to do? You are told as a country, you know, that 7 p.m. you're not supposed to be out, and then a police officer comes and finds you out. So there are two ways to eat. Let's take you to jail, or let's take you to quarantine. I mean, we're also looking at how well we can ensure that we limit the numbers of people who are being taken to, you know, correctional facilities and all that. So when we're talking about the aspect of the people, now that you brought it and you say it is very pertinent, then we'd want to ask again. These cases are reporting so much in the urban areas in comparison to the rural areas. What could be informing this? Yes,
when we say the urban areas, it's of course we're talking about the informal settlements mainly. Let's not hide from that fact. So for the urban areas, of course, you find, due to a lot of desperation, especially during the curfew, people are put between a rock and a hard place. I mean, let's say a place like Huruma. Now, someone is employed in town or somewhere away from Huruma or industrial area. Maybe their shift runs up to 6 o'clock or 5. I mean, that things that happen in Kenya that you will not believe. Now, they have a lot of trouble getting matatu, or they have to walk even so as to save a coin to be able to go and get something extra for the family. Now, that's why I said it's a socioeconomic issue. And you will realize that even since the government extended the curfew hours from 7 to 9, they're still. But you see, now most of it is just, I'm saying it's more of, it goes beyond simply telling people you're breaking the, even if you're breaking the law. That law, that thing you're breaking, it means there's a law. Of course, you're breaking the law. That means the law is there. And the law does not say that you whip an adult, you whip even kids.
You're not supposed to.
You're not even supposed to beat your children.
Away from those days.
Yes. So why? There's no justification, and that is what we need to stop. We need to stop justifying. We need to stop saying we are pushing the police. It's not like, for example, if today we had 1,000 people, or 1 million people holding an illegal demonstration in Nairobi. The police will not just start shooting. What will happen is they will ask for reinforcements. They'll say, "Oh, these people might overwhelm us." But what normally happens? Somebody throws tear gas. Okay, use of force is allowed under law, but in extreme circumstances. If the police officer's life is in danger, if it's in protection of another person also whose life is in danger. Like if a policeman sees you, I'm stabbing you, or I'm about to stab you, they can shoot me, or they can beat me up and whatever. I mean, that is justifiable use of force. But this thing of someone is probably even kneeling, lying on the floor, you're still trampling on them, that is not acceptable. It doesn't matter whether, there's no excuse for saying, oh, people were supposed to be at home by 7 or by 9 p.m. anyway. What were they doing? I would say that is what continues to perpetuate the culture of torture and other degrading treatment. Now, would you say that the people are hypocritical in nature in how we have tried to address this? You noted that sometimes we talk about torture, you know, especially when we have seen it happening, you know, and now there's something to condemn, and then there's this policeman who's considered to be rogue, and we have to condemn it. We condemn, and then after a while, there's so much silence. Just the other day, like a month ago, we had demonstrations, we had people out there in the streets complaining about this, and boom, this is not being discussed any longer. I mean, are we being hypocritical in how we are approaching this? I would say yes, no. Yes, because of course we only talk about it for a while, and then when we realize internally that it doesn't affect us really, you know, we sometimes some people feel they need to be primary, yes, they need to be primary recipients of an ill to really speak about it. No, because again I say it's not supposed to be a way of culture, us complaining about something. Okay, I mean people have so much other things to deal with, but again I take the challenge back to platform. People like yourselves in the media, you should be able to assist in this, because an individual can only do it, can only go so far with it. Because I mean, I will make noise and sound and shout myself hoarse. Then what? If I don't have the platform, if I'm not able, for example, I'm privileged at least to speak about it from here. But there may be somebody who even has better ideas, better knowledge on this topic, but they are unable to because nobody takes them seriously. Yes.
Okay. Now that we all acknowledge that indeed torture is wrong, torture is illegal, and there are effects to it, and people need to know that. Sometimes actually people overlook some of these things, and the long-term effects are pretty much unfortunate. So how then do we come and address this issue at the level whereby we have victims of torture, you know, psychological impact that has been laid upon them, you know, the negatives that comes out of it? So how do we get them back to understanding that yes, life has to move on?
Yes, that is a very, very onerous task. It's quite, because it's very progressional. I mean, you can't meet someone who has been tortured today and you just start talking to them it's okay, you're going to be fine, you'll survive. I mean, many psychologists will tell you that some of these things even go for years in terms of the impact. And also there's a primary victim, and then there's a secondary victim. For example, there are children who have seen their parents being, you see, if police break into my house and my daughters see me being beaten up, they may not say it, but it would scar them forever. So there are various angles to look at this. But the problem, of course, now it is now for resources, for example, and also the question is who does it and how do they do it. As much as the laws are there, we've realized that the government may not have the emotional stamina, if any at all, to go through to the last mile in terms of following up on cases. That's why the private, the activists and the NGOs come up to assist in terms of now bridging that gap, because the gap is there. But a lot needs to be done, because these NGOs, they also have capacity challenges. You find that with time, there's a time where Kenya's rating in the world in terms of economics was upgraded. And of course now that has a ripple effect even in terms of donor funding for activities. You'll be told that, oh, you guys now have a 2010 constitution. You have a new constitution which has created very many institutions. We've been giving funds towards support of these institutions to be able to be up and running. We don't think this budget that you have is, they slash it. So of course it constrains these NGOs. So a lot needs to be done. Even as we talk about money, I think more awareness out there and more reporting would help a lot.
All right, speaking of which, if you would paint a picture of what the situation is like, I know we're still waiting for the numbers, but you suppose that it is that grievous? Is it a ticking time bomb?
I hold a different view. There's been improvement, but where I agree with the people in the sector is that even one is not good. Even one, we should get to a point where it's zero. Yes, because one life lost or one limb lost is not good. It's not good. So there's a lot needs to be done. I'm not one who always wants to focus on numbers, because at what point will we say it's okay? You know, when you start talking statistics, we'll say, oh, at least, and then we lounge and say, oh, it's not as bad as 5 years ago. But no, up to the last point where we say, if a policeman or if a public officer is going to use violence, it has to be justified. That is the day I'll be happy, because this thing of saying, oh, last year it was 30,000 people, today is 3 people. Why these 3 people? They mean something. So yes.
All right. And now speaking of justification, and there are instances where we've seen communities justifying why some policemen have had to be rogue and even tight on others. Like for instance, now torture has been used to as a form of controlling communities and families. I don't know whether you're privy to that case of Katitu. There's one Katitu. There's a guy who was somewhere in Githurai. And anyway, some of these policemen who
the policeman who people protested after
he was arrested. And, yes, every other time he said, like, if you shoot one, the rest of the others will be scared. The youths down there will have to be, in line, and they will abide by the law. And in a way, it has been looked at as something that has worked. The residents will tell you that, since he came on board, we now have peace. At least we do not have these youths terrorizing us. I mean, how do you strike a balance in understanding that this could be a bad thing and equally a good thing?
Well, I'll just distinct that with you remember the Mungiki purge?
Yes.
I mean, will you sit there and tell me that all the young people who died, courtesy of when the late John Michuki was doing the purge on Mungiki, were all those deaths justified? Would you be able to tell? That is the point. You don't know. Yeah. I mean, sometimes people are being arrested because they are walking with others. So it is very risky to give so much power to an individual to be the judge, jury, and executioner. Because even in Isili, you heard about this officer, I think they call him Rashid or something, who seems to be above the law. Yeah. The point is, everyone is above the law. Everyone is under the law. Yeah. No one is above the law. But the moment we start saying, oh, Linda can do it because this person, she will be resolving this issue. Right. That is wrong. That is wrong to me because we don't have the facts. We don't know if all these young men were actually criminals. Right. I'm sure even as you were growing up, your mother and your parents probably used to tell you about bad company. Did that make you a bad person? No. That's the thing. So I don't think we should not use justification of any form. And in any case, the law tells us it can never be justified. Even terrorism. That's another one. Yeah. That it's been used as justification that this person was a terrorist and all that. Who said that? Who said that? Yeah. We've had instances where police officers who have been in deals with people, rogue police officers, I must say, who have been in business deals with people, then things are set up and people are killed. Yes. Yeah, so I will not allow that train of thought in my mind to say that, it's justified or not. Let these people be taken. Because as an officer, as a police officer, for example, you have the tools of trade in terms of you can investigate, you can apprehend, and you can, in conjunction with the DPP, prosecute. I mean, build up a solid case. Like I told you when we were starting the show, we give a lot of excuses on behalf of people who break the law. When we say that these were, in fact, the common excuse is, the police, the courts will release them. Conduct proper investigations. Present these people to the courts. Argue. That is the thing. Because like the mantra in law says, you'd rather 10 people go in who are guilty than put in one innocent person. So that's the thing. When we start doing it correctly, very few will pass through. All right. Yes. What would be the most noble way of dealing with these rogue officers or any other government officers that have done this? And for instance, we've seen some of them being transferred, from this area to a different area. Some of them have literally been sentenced to death, so something of the sort. So what would be the most? I mean, is it a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, something of the sort? No. Yeah. The law to take its course. Okay. If there's evidence, I think, I don't know, there was an officer, an OCS from one of the stations in Eastlands, the one who, it's alleged, even he was the one sentenced to death, he took a suspect, put him inside a drum of water, torturing him to say to confess to some ill. Those things, I mean, how do you justify that? Right. How do you justify that? So for me, the law is very clear in terms of if you're guilty of torture, 25 years. Right. If you aid, abet, or in any way condone torture through any form or encourage, 15 years or 1 million imprisonment. It's there. So we don't need to be talking as if there's a vacuum in the law. There's no vacuum.
All right, and of course we remember that case yesterday in Nandi County where one person was shot.
In Lessos, yes.
Yes, in Lessos, and I mean it's a story that is still ongoing. Investigations are running into it, and of course the police was saying that this police officer has been suspended. Is suspension good enough? Maybe they're going to be there's going to be a transfer or anything. I mean, the delayment also on the investigations. Sincerely speaking, is there something that can be done towards fast tracking this?
You know, as a practitioner in the justice system, I'm always careful when we speak about the pace of things like investigations and even a court case, because when you are on the ground, the things you see that make it make pace not a priority per se. Because, for example, if you rushed investigations into a case, and then you don't do, then it becomes half-baked or it's not proper. What happens? This person will go scot-free. So sometimes that's why you see even some cases you hear IPOA or whichever agency, even corruption matters. Yesterday, people were sentenced, people were fined over $500 million each for a case something that happened in 2013.
Long time ago.
Of 2014.
Eventually.
The wheels of justice grind slowly at times, but they grind for sure. So it is okay, and this is not unique to Kenya. You know, the problem I think sometimes as Kenyans, we like beating ourselves so hard, too many times, and yet we forget to look at, even in more advanced democracies, even in the US, cases take long. And but
the biggest fear about that is that, again, as they take long, of course, there are altercations that would play in between the people who are going to, interfere with the processes of justice. And at some point in time, you had, I mean, in this particular case, people pulling out of the case and saying that, you know what, let me just withdraw this case. Because, well, within that, as the wheels of justice continue grinding, you find that, again, the threats are mated upon these family members. You know, it affects the larger picture of the family. And they sort of feel like, you know, there's no need of us going through this. It's more torture for us as we seek that justice.
Well, the truth is, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of bringing in other elements that goes towards supporting victims of torture. For example, there's the Witness Protection Act. We maybe didn't know, but we have the Witness Protection Agency, which is supposed to be doing a job. But again, there's issues of funding. They're not well equipped to do all this. I think for the Witness Protection Agency, it was more of putting the cart before the horse. There was a rush to create the agency before proper capacity building was done. In terms of the agency itself, resources, I mean, you're going to protect a witness. Do you have enough safe houses? For example, a witness who has undergone torture in Nairobi with police officers, and then you tell him or her that she's going to be housed in a safe house in Kiambu. They feel like, oh no. And then there's also that aspect of neutrality. At what point do I have confidence in police investigating police? Yes, but that's the thing is now because of people like IPOA, you're able to now place more trust. But I get the sense of hopelessness, and that is there. That is there in terms of even in civil matters generally. I think it's more of the tolerance levels of a person and how determined somebody is, because if someone is tortured, we can't force them to go ahead up to the end. Our work is simply to assist them, document, if possible, go to court to seek compensation. If they give up along the way, then you can't blame anyone else. I mean, and I can't also blame the victim. We can't do victim shaming here and say, oh no, you are not serious. We understand. But like I said, a lot needs to be done. We need to have more psychologists, counseling psychologists, that one, psychiatrists. We need to have doctors who are available, whether government or in the NGO world, who are ready and available. There need to be centers. A lot of, like you said, civic education needs to be done, information sharing, so that people know that if this happens to me, like, I'm sorry to use this example, but for rape victims, nowadays I see there's a lot of even what to do in case it happens to you. So those kind of what are they called? Well, those kind of aspects are very crucial and critical for things like torture, because it's a whole system. It's not this thing or this thing. They are all correlated. There's a domino effect. If one doesn't work, the rest don't work. So
all right. Sometimes one would want to say that, torture has been waited for me. You've sought us justice, but you know, sometimes you look at the kinds of torture, and they were probably grievous to a terrible nature. The likes of course, Honorable Matiba is still rest in peace, would tell you how torture can be at some point in time. So rehabilitative care and critical care is important to us, ensuring that you rebuild the lives of these torture survivors. So, I mean, do we have such programs that are actively ongoing, so that at least, in as much as maybe you say justice is about being, awarded millions and billions of shillings, I mean, at least they're able to take care of you critically and mentally, ensure that you're stable? Well, that is what we're talking about earlier, in terms of the fund. The law says that the fund shall be established, but then the fund is subject to the minister responsible for that, in implementing the act, to ensure. They talk about Minister for Justice. In this constitution of ours, there's no Minister for Justice. You understand? So we don't know whether the framers or the drafters didn't know that, or the anticipation. But again, you see, the appointment of cabinet, creation of cabinet positions, is more to the discretion of the party or the president who is in power. So there are those simple tweaks that we need to come up with. It may need to deal with things like amending the law somewhere, just to say remove this word. Let the act just say the fund will be established, and the funds will come from the contingency fund, consolidated fund. The exchequer will be paying it. But specifically to your issue of compensation, yes, you can follow. Even though the act the fund does not become operational, you can still go under the constitution and seek compensation. For like, there's a constitutional petition seeking for compensation for ills conducted against you. But for the NGO world, I would, from my experience, I know that, I mean, people cannot be compensated. It's only the aggressor who can compensate. But of course, there are programs which IMLU included have been trying to do, whereby even as we're taking up the case, we look at the socio-economic angle, psychological counseling. If someone had a business and maybe they are unable to do the business, like there was the case of the hawkers. There's a hawker who was killed, and then some county officers were prosecuted for this. And I think the case is ongoing. Like that one, I am aware that one of the victims, the widows, the families, the families, they were being supported, but it can only go so far, because it's very difficult to justify such funding from your donors. Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's pick up the words of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He says that torturers must never be allowed to get away with their crimes, and systems that enable torture should be dismantled or transformed. Torture is a crime against humanity. So what is so special about this year's celebrations? Of course, first of all, it's just to honor the victims of torture, just to ensure that their suffering is not in vain. And the second, and also very important, is to take stock of where we are from as far back as 1987, when the convention became effective. Kenya ratified it and brought it into Kenyan law in 1997. Interestingly, just for information purposes, in East Africa, all countries, it's except Tanzania, have ratified the treaty. So it just shows you that of all continents, it's Africa mainly which still has issues. There are countries that have assented to it, but they have not ratified. They're still trying to give excuses why it's not in the law. But I'm not saying it's an African problem per se. The only thing is regimes that do not care about making torture fully illegal in their systems are usually authoritarian in nature. So it's about power. Torture is about power. Power between the aggressor, power of the aggressor over the victim. Making sure that I am in charge. And usually for me, I think those are people with low self-esteem. I mean, why do I need to beat you up? You're already there, you're helpless, and I'm still... And again, you're proceeding to beat me up and all that. Yes, indeed. All right, so your message to the people, the victims of torture, and the people out there, I think you said it's pretty much important that we come out and speak against these ills of the society. So I mean, you probably address this camera as you speak to them, and of course your parting shots.
Yes, so what I want to say that it is very important, if you're a torture survivor, you, as soon as possible, you document it, you seek assistance in documentation. If the same has been perpetrated by a public officer, if you're in doubt, you report, you should report to the police. But if you feel like you may not get support there, you can approach the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights. There are also various organizations, including the Independent Medical Legal Unit, which would be able to support you in ways and try to give you justice. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve Isinta, advocate of the High Court and of IMLU Network. It was great having you this morning. I don't know whether we have this story, Mr. Director, so we can proceed. Leave the people, just update them on what happened in Leso's protest yesterday, and we take a look at that particular story as we cross over to a different segment altogether. Nancy is on standby with Matters Entertainment. We say Fridays can never be complete if we do not get to feel the entertainment vibe. So if we're not going to have that story, not a problem. I mean, it's still ongoing, and we'll be taking a look at that. Yes, the Nandi protest stories. Yes, and these are two people who were killed in Leso's protest, and indeed they were shot dead at Nandi County after police clashed with demonstrators in the area. The demonstrators who torched a police house were protesting the arrest of a boda operator who had flouted COVID-19 rules, and that story was compiled by our very own Calvin Chitwa. Let's take a look at it as we say kwaheri on this particular segment.
The protesters claimed the man who was identified as Lazarus Tirop was shot dead at Leso's Trading Center following an argument with police officers who had arrested a boda operator for not wearing a mask. The man is said to have been shot and killed instantly by the police officer who fired at him while he was trying to negotiate for the release of the arrested man.
Tunataka maskari wote ambao wako Lesos hii wote, hata moja asibaki, tuanze mpya.
Pikipiki zenye ziko huko kwa polisi ni mingi. Kama sasa hizi pikipiki ni kama ni sawa, kwa sababu watu wa bodaboda wanafanyia hawa kazi. Tunataka haki.
Nandi County Commissioner Olaka Kutswa calmed the protesters, promising them action will be taken.
Mambo imeulizwa ya transfer, hiyo tumekubaliana ni leo. Sina mnayo.
Nandi County leaders led by Governor Stephen Sang, Senator Samson Cherargei, and Nandi Hills MP Alfred Keter have condemned the incident and demanded the immediate arrest of the police officer involved in the killing.
Mapolisi hawa hapa sahi wote wataondolewa hapa. Haiwezekani hawatabaki.
According to Anne Makori, the chairperson of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, they have already dispatched a rapid response investigation team at the scene that has initiated investigations into the matter with a view of establishing how the shooting happened and if the force used was necessary. Calvin Chitwa, TV47, Nandi County.